The salty tang of the Pacific Ocean was seared into my memory, a constant reminder that the island of Oahu was as much a part of me now as the faded tattoos on my skin. Sunset painted the Waikiki sky in a masterpiece of fiery oranges and pinks, as tourists with cameras dangling from sunburned necks snapped endless selfies, eager to capture the perfect vacation moment. Their laughter and chatter faded in and out with the rhythm of the waves, a soundtrack to my self-imposed exile on this tiny slice of paradise. I took another drag from my cigarette, savoring the harshness against the sugary sweetness of the tropical air. Across from me, Kelly sat. Even in the fading light, her beauty was undeniable, a tangle of sun-kissed blonde hair pulled into a haphazard bun, a smattering of freckles across her nose, and eyes that sparkled with boundless energy despite the toddler clinging to her leg. Ryan, her husband and the embodiment of a California surfer boy washed ashore, wrestled playfully with the little one in the sand. They were picture perfect, a shining example of the carefree life tourists expected to find in Hawaii. What they didn't see was the carefully masked undercurrent of exhaustion in Kelly's eyes, the subtle tension in Ryan's shoulders. We weren't just friends anymore. We were a lifeline thrown to each other amidst the chaos of island life, bound by shared laughter and the unspoken secrets that crackled beneath the surface. We met at the same Waikiki restaurant, slaves to the relentless tide of demanding tourists, seeking escape and cheap thrills under the guise of an island vacation. Our evenings were an antidote to the endless grind, filled with pulsing music, blinding lights, and chasing the next good time until the sunrise turned the ocean to liquid gold. Tonight, though, there was an undercurrent of tension, a dissonance that grated against the usual harmony of crashing waves and carefree chatter. Kelly seemed distant, her gaze flickering between Ryan and me a little too often, her usually dazzling smile seeming a touch brittle. Ryan, usually the life of the party, was uncharacteristically quiet. Those carefree blue eyes, always sparkling with mischief, were clouded with something I couldn't name, a restlessness that seemed to coil within him like a snake ready to spring free. "Hey, you okay?" I asked, flicking my dwindling cigarette towards the ocean. It sizzled angrily before disappearing into the waves, a fleeting spark extinguished. I longed to reach out, to brush back a lock of that wild surfer boy hair that always seemed to fall perfectly into his eyes, to offer comfort to the part of him only I seemed to see. But an invisible barrier held me back, a nagging reminder that my role in this play was that of the silent observer, destined to watch the drama unfold from the edge of the stage. "Peachy," he muttered, the sarcasm a palpable wave washing over me. His fingers tightened around the beer bottle in his hand, the glass creaking ominously as if it might shatter at any moment. His energy, usually infectious and boundless, felt coiled tight, a spring ready to burst forth. "Wanna ditch this place? Go find some real fun?" He surprised me with a half-hearted attempt at his trademark grin, but it faded quickly. There was a desperation behind it, a flicker of something akin to fear that he tried poorly to disguise. Without waiting for my answer, he grabbed Kelly's hand, a silent plea in his eyes that she didn't seem to notice, and hauled her to her feet. The toddler squealed happily at the sudden change of pace, oblivious to the storm brewing under the surface. And just like that, we were melting into the throng of tourists, swallowed by the Honolulu night, looking for an escape in a city built on illusions. Chapter 2, Cracks in the Facade. The following week, the simmering tension that had haunted our nights exploded like a rogue wave against the delicate structure we'd built. Kelly became a wisp of a woman, disappearing for hours without a word. Her once vibrant energy dissolved, replaced by a hollowness that chilled me deeper than any ocean breeze. Ryan, usually glued to her side, unable to hide his adoration even when it bordered on suffocating, grew restless and irritable. His carefree grin morphed into a near-permanent scowl, replaced by mumbled complaints and slammed doors. The apartment, usually alive with music and laughter, became an echo chamber of unspoken accusations and a suffocating silence. Desperate to fill the void, I found myself turning towards the same dark path they had already begun to tread. Late one night, after a particularly brutal shift at the restaurant where a party of 6 had walked out on a ludicrously large bill, I found Ryan nursing a bottle of bottom-shelf tequila at our usual spot. It was a dingy bar tucked away in a back alley, the kind of place where deals were made in dark corners and neon signs promised a salvation you'd never find at the bottom of a bottle. He was a mess, his words tumbling out in a torrent fueled by cheap alcohol and a potent mix of anger and confusion. It was a verbal hurricane, ripping through the last shreds of his carefully constructed carefree facade. He railed against his crumbling marriage, a desperate monologue punctuated by strangled sobs. He talked about feeling trapped in the roles of husband and father, longing for an escape that couldn't be found amidst dirty diapers and credit card bills. There was a gnawing emptiness, he said, a hunger that all the parties and all the women in the world couldn't fill. Absolutely. Here's the rest of the story. Chapter 3, Opiate Dreams. I mean, I love her. I think, he slurred, the neon lights painting his face with a sickly glow. But is this it? Kids, mortgages, and dinners we cook while pretending to be happy. Christ, it feels like I'm suffocating, you know? He stared at me then, those blue eyes pleading for an answer I didn't have. A pang of something twisted in my gut, guilt, pity, and something hotter I didn't dare name, didn't dare confront head on. The truth of my feelings for Ryan dangled between us, unspoken but crackling with a dangerous energy. In that moment, I should have gotten up, should have walked away, should have done the right thing. But, as is often the case when the darkness beckons, the right thing, the sensible thing, had never been my forte. As the night wore on, as another round of cheap drinks clouded our judgment, the lines between friendship and something more blurred beyond recognition. In the sticky heat, fueled by the desperation in his eyes and the weakness echoing in my own soul, we stumbled back to his place. A silent understanding hung between us, heavy and intoxicating, as he shut the door to the rest of the world behind us. It was wrong, I knew it was. Kelly was my best friend, and the flicker of trust still shining in her eyes made the guilt burn in my stomach like acid. But as Ryan pulled me close, his breath hot on my skin and those troubled eyes searching mine, wrong was the last thing on my mind. It was selfish and destructive, a choice driven by buried desires and a need for escape that had nothing to do with love. In that brief moment of reckless abandon, the consequences seemed impossibly far away, a problem for another day. We were drowning in the here and now, the tangled sheets and murmured promises, and it was enough to silence the guilt. For a while. Chapter 4, Losing Control. The days blurred into a haze of stolen moments and whispered lies. Kelly, oblivious and swept up in the chaos of motherhood, seemed unconcerned with Ryan's lengthy disappearances. I became his alibi, his excuse, the convenient reason he wasn't around to change diapers or read bedtime stories. The guilt gnawed at me, a constant ache in my chest, but it was drowned out by the rush of forbidden pleasure and the sweet relief I found in Ryan's arms. It couldn't last, of course. It was a wildfire in a tinderbox just waiting for a spark. That spark came in the form of Jameson, the military guy who had worshipped me from afar for months. Always the sharpest tool in the shed, he had figured out the truth, or enough of it to break what remained of my restraint. One night at the bar, after too many whiskey shots and too many meaningful glances, he confronted me. "Playing house with your best friend's husband?" he asked, his voice low and full of disgusted fascination. "That's low, even for you, Michael." The truth, harsh and undeniable, hung in the air between us like smoke, impossible to ignore. I turned away, unable to meet his accusing eyes, and escaped into the night. It was then, as I wandered the brightly lit streets of Waikiki, feeling lost and sick to my stomach, that I ran into Ramsey. He was our connection, the source, the one who turned us onto the world that promised to dissolve all those messy emotions. "You need this," he said, his voice a soothing whisper. He produced a tiny silver packet, a promise and a curse folded into the crinkling foil. It wouldn't solve my problems, I knew it, but it might make me forget them for a while, and in that moment of weakness, that's all I wanted. Chapter 5, The Withdrawal. The opiates took hold quickly, their insidious tendrils wrapping around us and squeezing the life out of anything resembling normalcy. The numbness was seductive, a siren song that beckoned me further into the comforting oblivion. Kelly, always seeking escape, found solace in the numbness they provided. Soon, the four of us were caught in a downward spiral, chasing the next hit with an all-consuming desperation. Paradise became a living hell, a place where the sunsets meant nothing and the laughter had been replaced by the constant, urgent need for more. Ryan changed. The playful, easy-going guy I'd fallen for was replaced by a ghost of himself, his eyes haunted, his smile a hollow echo of what it once was. He became paranoid, volatile, convinced that I would betray our secret to Kelly. The guilt that had once plagued me turned to resentment. He'd pulled me into this mess, and now he wanted me out of his life. But there was no escape, not now. We were bound together by the threads of addiction, our secrets holding us captive. Our jobs, our lives, everything fell to the wayside. The restaurant didn't care about excuses anymore, and it wasn't long before we were fired. The apartment became our prison, a den of desperation and whispered arguments. The only time the tension broke was when we scored, those fleeting moments of artificial bliss before the craving returned with teeth bared, demanding more. One night, high and hazy, Ryan exploded. The accusations flew, each one more venomous than the last. I hadn't seduced him, he screamed. He'd wanted me all along. Kelly was just a placeholder, a means to an end. The harsh words ripped through my self-induced fog, a brutal dose of reality. I wasn't his savior, wasn't his escape. I was just another mistake in his endless string of self-destructive choices. "Get out," he snarled, his voice trembling with a barely contained rage. "Just get the hell out." I stumbled out into the humid night, tears mingling with the rain, lost and more alone than I had ever been. The island that had once been my promised land, my paradise, was now a cage, and the only way to break free was to face the consequences of the mess we'd made. Chapter 6, Hitting Bottom. The withdrawal was agony incarnate. My body, a traitor turned torturer, punished me for the poison I'd willingly poured down my throat. Every bone ached, every nerve on fire, my stomach twisting into a knot of nausea. Fever dreams haunted my restless sleep, a cruel kaleidoscope of Ryan's accusations and Kelly's dimming eyes. Guilt and self-loathing clawed at my sanity with icy fingers. I'd crashed at Ramsey's place, a pathetic heap of sweat and regrets splayed across his grimy couch. He tossed me a bottle of water and some aspirin, mumbling empty platitudes about it getting easier with time. But time had lost all meaning, each second stretching into an eternity of pain. The days and nights became an indistinguishable blur. I'd retch into the overflowing trash can, too weak to empty it, then curl into a shivering ball, craving the sweet oblivion of sleep that wouldn't come. Ramsey would disappear for hours, returning with a strained smile and a promise of relief that never lasted long enough. One endless night, as I lay curled on the floor, the relentless tremors threatening to tear my body apart, I saw Ryan's face in the shadows. It was a grotesque caricature of him, skin stretched taut over his skull, eyes hollowed pits that burned with accusation. I wanted to scream, to plead for forgiveness, but my raw throat produced only a strangled croak. The apparition leaned closer, his lips moving silently, words forming in the stifling air. Traitor. Killer. Monster. I woke, or perhaps I never truly slept, in a cold sweat. The scream lodged in my chest like a stone. The room spun, nausea rising like a black tide. Desperation clawed at me, replacing the fear that had been my constant companion. It was more than I could take, more than I deserved. I had to make it stop. Stumbling to my feet, my movements jerky and uncoordinated, I began tearing the apartment apart. There had to be something, anything, to dull the pain long enough to form a coherent thought. Old pill bottles, remnants of less desperate times, clattered to the floor, promising insufficient relief. A half-forgotten bottle of whiskey mocked me from the kitchen counter, its amber liquid promising an escape that would lead only to a different kind of hell. And then I found it. A crumpled bit of foil, tucked into a forgotten jeans pocket, a last resort squirreled away in a moment of weakness. My fingers shook as I unfolded it, revealing a speck of salvation or perhaps damnation. It didn't matter. I was too far gone to care. The relief was instantaneous, a merciful wave washing away the agony, replacing it with a numb warmth that spread through my battered body like a comforting balm. The room stopped spinning, the nausea subsided, and the relentless tremors faded. I sank to the floor, tears mingling with the sweat on my face, sobs of relief racking my exhausted frame. I had survived, escaped the relentless jaws of withdrawal, but even as I surrendered to the artificial peace, a chilling realization gnawed at me. I hadn't escaped anything. I had simply reset the clock, delaying the inevitable while sinking deeper into this self-created prison. In the hazy aftermath, a sliver of clarity cut through the fog. I couldn't do this anymore. Not to myself, not to Ryan, not to Kelly. The love I still held for Ryan, however twisted it had become, was mingled with a sickening self-loathing. What kind of friend was I, to tear apart his life with such reckless selfishness? I thought of Kelly, her vibrant spirit flickering in the face of our betrayal, and a wave of guilt crashed over me. My actions were destroying them both, piece by piece. With trembling hands, I fished my battered phone out of my pocket. It took several attempts to focus enough to dial the only number that offered any hope, Ryan's parents. The conversation was a blur, my voice cracked and slurred, choked with tears and confessions. I begged them to come, to rescue their son from the monster inside him, a monster I had helped create. 2 days later, they arrived. His father's face was a mask of weary disappointment, his eyes filled with a grief I hadn't thought possible, while his mother sobbed quietly. Ryan emerged from his bedroom, a gaunt specter of his former self. He stared at me, hatred and a flicker of something like shame warring in his dull eyes. I couldn't meet his gaze, the weight of guilt crushing my very soul. They packed him up, his life reduced to a few hastily filled suitcases, and a plane ticket back to the mainland, to rehab, to a chance I might never get. Before leaving, Ryan turned to me, his voice a harsh whisper. "You think you saved me? You didn't. You just killed everything good I had left." He turned away then, following his parents out the door without another look. The apartment was silent, the echoes of his words bouncing against the bare walls, a condemnation louder than any shout. I knew, without a shred of doubt, he was right. Chapter 7, Ryan's Reckoning. The rehab facility looked nothing like it did on TV. No ocean views, no celebrity clientele, just sterile walls and the ever-present smell of disinfectant. It was a prison of a different sort, one where Ryan was locked in a relentless battle against his own demons. The withdrawal, round 2, was a different beast. Nurses and therapists hovered, offering medications and murmured words of support, but the real fight was happening inside his own head. Nightmares stalked him, far more vivid and terrifying than the fever dreams of his first detox. Faces morphed, Kelly's smile twisting into Michael's knowing smirk, then dissolving into his own reflection, contorted with self-disgust. His parents visited, their faces strained with worry and a brittle hope he didn't deserve. He couldn't meet their eyes, unable to bear the disappointment etched into their features. Group therapy was a circle of hell he couldn't escape. Sharing his story, laying his broken pieces bare for strangers to gawk at, made his skin crawl. Yet, in the halting confessions of others, the housewife addicted to painkillers, the businessman whose life had crumbled under a mountain of cocaine, he caught glimpses of his own reflection. He was not alone in his self-destruction, a chilling realization that brought little comfort. The days stretched into an interminable blur of counseling sessions, bland meals, and the relentless ticking of the clock on the wall. He found a strange kind of solace in the rigid routine. It offered a structure his life had been lacking, a framework to which he could cling while trying to piece himself back together. He even started running, his body protesting at first, but then a rhythm emerging with each unsteady step. The endorphins were a feeble replacement for his usual poison, but they offered a glimmer of something resembling normalcy. Chapter 8, Michael's Ghosts. Back in Hawaii, life was a cruel imitation of its former self. The vibrant colors seemed to leach from the sunshine, the laughter of beachgoers grating and hollow. Michael haunted his old stomping grounds, unable to escape the reminders of his failure. The bar where he and Ryan had met for those fateful drinks, the beach where they had shared stolen kisses under a moonlit sky, even the scent of the ocean itself now carried the bitter tang of guilt and regret. Ramsey, ever the opportunist, still hung around, a constant reminder of the darkness they had embraced. Michael wanted to push him away, to scream that he'd destroyed his friends and his own life. But a nagging voice in his head whispered that he had no right to judge. Hadn't he followed the same path, just as willingly, driven by his own weaknesses? He went back to work at the restaurant, the familiar tasks a kind of anchor in the chaos of his emotions. The tourists still flocked, their complaints a welcome distraction from his own spiraling thoughts. News of Ryan filtered through, snippets of information from his parents. Rehab was tough, they said, but he seemed committed. It was a thin thread of hope that Michael clung to with desperate fingers. Kelly, blessed with a resilience that bordered on blind ignorance, seemed to weather the storm. The spark had dimmed even further, but she carried on, caring for her child, and moving through the motions of a life turned upside down. She didn't ask, or didn't seem to want to know the details of what had happened. Michael told himself it was better this way, that she deserved the illusion of normalcy he could no longer provide. Late one night, after his shift, he found himself wandering the sandy shore, drawn by some masochistic instinct. He sat where he and Ryan had once shared dreams and laughter. The tide whispered secrets that sounded a lot like accusations. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall and slender, her blonde hair whipping in the ocean breeze. "Kelly. I should hate you," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, "but I can't. None of it makes sense, but I forgive you." Her eyes, shimmering in the moonlight, held not anger, but a weary sadness that echoed his own. And in that moment, a flicker of something resembling peace washed over him. Redemption might be a bridge too far, but perhaps healing, one day, might not be entirely out of reach. Chapter 9, Rebuilding. Rehab wasn't a magic cure. There were no trumpets sounding the day Ryan was finally fixed, and the demons were suddenly exorcised. It was a slog, an uphill battle every single day. He attended endless group sessions, individual therapy so intense it made him want to crawl out of his skin, and classes about things like relapse triggers and coping mechanisms. Some days, he felt a glimmer of hope, a fleeting moment where he truly believed he could build a life without that constant, gnawing need. Other days, the darkness clawed at him, whispering insidious promises of escape and relief just one hit away. His relationship with Julian evolved from its initial awkwardness into something vital. They leaned on each other, found solace in shared confessions, and discovered a fierce determination to break free from the cycle that had nearly consumed them both. Julian became his lifeline, a reminder of what he was fighting for, of the responsibility he now carried to salvage whatever was left of their fractured family. Letters from Hawaii were a double-edged sword. News of Kelly slowly rebuilding her life, getting a real job, and enrolling in some community college courses brought a pang of guilt, but also a flicker of relief. Maybe, without him dragging her down, she could find a piece of the happiness she deserved. Michael's messages were filled with hesitant support, updates on life on the island, and an underlying apology that hung unspoken between the lines. Ryan filed them away, not yet ready to confront the tangled emotions they stirred. The day he finally finished the inpatient program, Ryan felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. The tightly controlled environment of rehab had become a safety net of sorts, and now he was being thrust back into a world where temptation lurked around every corner. His parents were there, of course, their pride tinged with a lingering worry that stabbed at his newfound resolve. Back home in California, everything was both comfortingly familiar and utterly alien. His old bedroom with its faded surf posters felt like a relic of another life, one lived by a reckless stranger he barely recognized. He got a job, a mindless, physical thing at a construction site that left him exhausted and too sore to dwell on his thoughts at night. He started attending 12-step meetings, the anonymous faces and stories of shared struggles a lifeline when the urge to run and fall back down the rabbit hole threatened to overwhelm him. Julian moved in, and the apartment became a chaotic but functional hub of recovery. They held each other accountable, pushing each other to eat better, to get some exercise, to reach for a book instead of a bottle when the darkness crept too close. It was far from perfect. There were setbacks, screaming arguments, and nights when one or the other would come close to throwing in the towel. But through it all, there was an unspoken pact, a desperate determination to not succumb. Chapter 10, News from Paradise. One sun-drenched afternoon, over 6 months into this fragile new existence, a thick envelope arrived. The Hawaii return address sent a jolt of unease through Ryan. This wasn't a quick update from Michael, this was something else. He tore it open, his heart pounding in his chest. It was an invitation, not a wedding, as he'd feared, but something he hadn't even dared to consider. Kelly was throwing a party to celebrate being 1 year sober, and, in a twist that made him want to laugh and scream at the same time, she wanted him there. Michael's hasty scrawl at the bottom added an awkward congratulations and a plea to consider attending. He threw the invitation across the room. It was madness. Pure, unadulterated insanity to think he could step back into that world, with all its ghosts and landmines, and not implode. It was a test, one he wasn't sure he was ready to pass. And yet, a traitorous part of him, the part still desperately in love with his best friend, with the life they used to have, whispered of maybe, of second chances, of the possibility of healing. The invitation became a battleground in his mind. He attended meetings with renewed fervor, pouring out his fears and doubts. He called his therapist twice in one day, desperately seeking guidance. Julian, in his quiet, steadfast way, offered unwavering support for whatever decision Ryan ultimately made. And then, on a sleepless night, staring at the flickering shadows on the ceiling, clarity pierced the fog. He booked the flight. Not for Kelly, not even for Michael, for himself. He owed it to the broken and bleeding part of him to try to prove that he was stronger than the demons of his past, that he could face his mistakes head-on and still emerge on the other side. Chapter 11, Walking on Eggshells. The flight felt both endless and too short all at once. Hours of staring at the clouds below, his mind racing, churning up memories and fears he hadn't confronted in months. He touched down in Honolulu with a knot of dread in his stomach. The airport was a whirlwind of familiar sights, smells, and sounds, a sensory overload that threatened to send him spiraling. It was all he could do to keep his feet moving forward, collecting his suitcase, and hopping in a cab. Michael was waiting at Kelly's apartment, a nervous smile on his face. The awkward hug that followed was a testament to the unspoken chasm that now existed between them. Michael looked different, thinner, with an undercurrent of tension beneath his carefully composed smile. Kelly arrived shortly after, a whirlwind of energy wrapped in a bright sundress. She threw her arms around Ryan, and for a moment, it felt like nothing had changed. But he saw the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, a reminder of the irreparable damage he had caused. The party was small, a handful of Kelly's new friends from work and her AA group. The atmosphere was a bizarre mix of genuine celebration and underlying tension. Everyone was painfully aware of the elephant in the room, of the unspoken history that hung heavy in the tropical air. Ryan moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes that felt hollow. He avoided the makeshift bar, a silent testament to his newfound sobriety. Instead, he nursed a soda water and tried to make small talk, to appear, at least on the surface, like the old Ryan had somehow miraculously reappeared. The inevitable moment finally came. Kelly pulled him aside, onto the small lanai that overlooked the bustling street below. The setting sun painted the sky in vibrant hues, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside him. "You came," she said, her voice soft. "I had to," he replied, unable to look away from her. She was radiant, with a newfound strength that hadn't been there before, but he also saw the lingering shadows in her eyes, the sadness that echoed his own. "I never meant to hurt you," he said, the words tumbling out. "I was so lost, and I dragged you down with me. I'm so sorry, Kelly." Her smile was thin, brittle. "I know," she said quietly, "but it's not just about me, it's about what you did to yourself." The truth of her words stung. He hadn't earned her forgiveness, not the easy kind anyway. He nodded, unable to form any other response. "I'm glad you're doing better," she said, a hint of genuine warmth returning to her voice. "Michael keeps me updated. That means something. To both of us." And just like that, a tiny sliver of the weight on his chest lifted. Perhaps healing didn't look like grand gestures and sweeping apologies, but in the small acknowledgments of the pain he had caused, and the hope that one day he might truly forgive himself. Chapter 12, A Different Kind of Closure. The rest of his trip was a blur of careful interactions and bittersweet nostalgia. He visited his parents, the conversation stilted at first, then thawing into a tentative hopefulness as they saw the changes in their son. He went surfing with Julian, reclaiming a piece of the joy he had once associated with the waves. There was even a group hike with Kelly, Michael, and some friends, a testament to the new boundaries that had been formed, and the possibility of a different kind of friendship, forged in the fires of shared trauma. And then, there was the inevitable visit to the beach. He and Michael walked along the familiar stretch of sand, the setting sun casting long shadows. "I wasn't trying to destroy you," Michael said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. "That's not an excuse, just... I wanted you to know." "I know," Ryan replied, his voice rough. "We were both drowning, reaching for anything that would keep us afloat. It just so happened that the life preserver we grabbed onto was made of poison." They walked on, the rhythm of the waves a soothing counterpoint to the storm raging inside him. "I miss you," Ryan finally admitted. "The old you, the old us. But I know that's gone." "It is," Michael agreed quietly. "But maybe there's room for something new, if you want it." Ryan stopped, turning to face his best friend, the man he'd loved and betrayed. The future was uncertain, a vast ocean stretching before them. But in that moment, as the last rays of the sun painted the sky in hues of forgiveness and fragile hope, he knew he had found a kind of closure. Perhaps not the ending he had once envisioned, but an ending nonetheless. And sometimes, that was enough to begin again. 3/18. This document created by Kenneth/Itchell. Please report any violations of the terms of use including copyright and other violations to support@buglelabs.com.